Candy-coated Soviet style. How the Germans tried to revamp captured T-34 tanks before the Battle of Kursk. Hey there, history buffs. Buckle up for a wild ride through a lesser-known chapter of World War II. One that's packed with intrigue, ingenuity, and some serious tank drama. We're diving into the story of how the German army, desperate for tanks, decided to take Soviet T-34 tanks and give them a German makeover right before one of the biggest battles in history, the Battle of Kursk. This tale is full of surprises, so let's get started. Why didn't the Germans jump on the T-34 right away? World War II was a chaotic mess of epic battles, but it also had some quirky details that don't always make it into the history books. One of those is how armies dealt with captured enemy gear. You'd think that if you nabbed a ton of enemy weapons, tanks, or vehicles, you'd use them to give your opponent a taste of their own medicine, right? Well, not quite. Small stuff like rifles, pistols, or submachine guns. Sure, those got passed around like candy at a parade. But heavy machinery like tanks? That's a whole different ballgame. Tanks are complicated beasts. They need spare parts, maintenance, and crews who know how to handle them. Back in the summer of 1941, the German army, or Wehrmacht, hit the jackpot. After steamrolling through Soviet lines, they captured a ton of Red Army gear. Tanks, artillery, tractors, you name it. But here's the kicker. Out of all this loot, the Germans were weirdly obsessed with a Soviet tractor called the STZ-5. Why? It was simple, reliable, and perfect for towing their big guns. The legendary T-34 tank, which later became a Soviet icon, didn't catch their eye at first. The Germans were more comfortable with their own tanks, like the Panzer III and Panzer IV, which felt familiar and easier to maintain. But oh, how things changed when the going got tough. By the spring of 1943, the Germans were in a tight spot. They were gearing up for a massive showdown at Kursk, a battle that could make or break the war on the Eastern Front. Problem was, they were running low on tanks. German factories couldn't churn out new ones fast enough, and their existing tanks were either breaking down or getting blasted by the Soviets. The 2nd SS Panzer Corps, which included elite divisions like Leibstandarte, Das Reich, and Totenkopf, that's Death's Head in English, was supposed to get a shiny new batch of Panther tanks. But guess what? Those Panthers went to another unit, the Grossdeutschland Division, which got about 200 of them. Das Reich, in particular, was left high and dry, with barely enough tanks to form a single beefed-up company. That's when the Germans started eyeing those captured Soviet T-34s. Kharkov, from Soviet tank factory to German repair shop. So, what do you fix a bunch of captured Soviet tanks? The answer was obvious, where they were made. The Kharkov factory, known as Factory Number 183, was the birthplace of the T-34. But by 1943, it wasn't the bustling hub it used to be. Back in 1941, the Soviets evacuated most of the factory's equipment and workers to the Ural Mountains, far from the front lines. Still, some stuff got left behind. Workshops, tools, and even a few workers who, sadly, were forced to help the Germans under occupation. The Germans saw their chance and decided to turn the remnants of this factory into a repair shop for their captured T-34s. Now, don't let anyone fool you into thinking this was some fancy SS tank factory. That's a bit of an exaggeration. It was really just a few beat-up workshops filled with debris. The Germans had to roll up their sleeves and get to work, clearing rubble, fixing the roof, and scrounging up tools. By April of 1943, they'd hauled in about 750 tons of materials, from steel to spare parts. They also rounded up 15 to 20 specialists, including some local engineers who likely weren't thrilled about working for the enemy. And just like that, a makeshift repair shop was born on the ruins of a Soviet factory. T-34, German style, a tank makeover. Where did they find the tanks to fix? That part was easy. Earlier that year, the Third Battle of Kharkov had just wrapped up, and the Soviets took a beating. The battlefields were littered with knocked-out or abandoned T-34 tanks. The Germans collected them like kids picking up toys after a playdate, and towed them to their new repair shop. But they didn't just want to patch these tanks up, they wanted to make them better. The Germans approached the job with their trademark precision. They stripped each tank down to its nuts and bolts, replaced broken parts, and even gave them some upgrades. For example, they swapped out Soviet radios for German ones, which they thought were more reliable. They also added German sights for better aiming. The T-34's turret was notoriously cramped, which drove the German crews nuts, so they tried to make it roomier and even installed commanders' cupolas for better visibility. In short, they were trying to turn these Soviet tanks into something that felt a little more like home. By the summer of 1943, they'd managed to fix up 25 T-34 tanks, enough to form a full company for the Das Reich division. These tanks rolled into action during Operation Citadel, the German offensive at Kursk. And you know what? They held their own pretty well. The Germans were quick to repair any tanks that got hit, so their numbers kept climbing. On July 13th, 1943, they had 11 battle-ready T-34s. By the next day, that number was up to 14, and by July 17th, they had 17. That repair shop in Kharkov was working overtime. To understand why the Germans were so desperate to use these Soviet tanks, let's zoom out and look at the economic situation. By 1943, Germany was stretched thin. Their factories were struggling to keep up with the war's demands. Tanks needed steel, fuel, and skilled workers, all of which were in short supply. On top of that, the Eastern Front was a meat grinder. Historians estimate that by the spring of 1943, the Germans had lost about 70% of their tanks in the East. New tanks like the Panther and Tiger were cutting-edge but tough to build and prone to breakdowns. Enter the T-34. These tanks were simpler and more reliable than many German designs, and they packed a serious punch. Using captured tanks was like finding money in your couch cushions. It saved the Germans from having to spend months building new ones. Instead, they could quickly get these machines back in action, stretching their resources a bit further. It was a clever move in a war where every tank counted. This whole saga with the T-34 tanks is fascinating for a few reasons. First, it shows just how resourceful people can be when their backs are against the wall. The Germans were in a bind, but they managed to set up a repair shop in a war-torn city and breathe new life into enemy tanks. That's some serious ingenuity, even if it was born out of desperation. Second, it's a testament to the T-34's brilliance. This tank was so well designed that even the Germans wanted a piece of it. Its simplicity, toughness, and firepower made it a legend that outlasted the war. As an American, I can't help but admire the Soviet engineers who built such a beast. It's like the Jeep of tanks, built to keep going no matter what. But there's a flip side. Using captured tanks wasn't all smooth sailing. The Germans had to deal with a shortage of spare parts, and their crews needed training to handle these unfamiliar machines. Plus, let's be real, driving an enemy tank probably felt a little weird, like borrowing your rival's car. And when the Soviets liberated Kharkov in August of 1943, the whole operation fell apart. The repair shop was history, and the Germans lost their makeshift tank factory. The story of these captured T-34s isn't just a cool war anecdote. It's a reminder of how people adapt in tough times. The Germans, despite their high-tech reputation, had to lean on Soviet tanks to keep their war machine running. It's a nod to the T-34's genius and a glimpse into the harsh realities of World War II, where every resource mattered. I hope you enjoyed this deep dive into history as much as I did putting it together. If you're as hooked on these kinds of stories as I am, subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below. Tell us what blew your mind the most, or share your own World War II stories. Maybe you got a family tale from the era? Let's keep the conversation going and uncover more hidden gems from history together.